Hello, fellow human. I'm Human Pruitt, and this is Human Gem. And today on WebDM, human music. We like it. So Jim Davis, what is it to be what the Ferengi call human?
Human show.
The human show.
We're doing a human show.
Yeah, I mean, we are humans.
Right.
So to speak.
Presumably,
assuming that we aren't all figments of some...
right, assuming that we're not all figments of a simulated reality of an alien intelligence that could end it at any moment because they didn't like the save game and they're going to... Humans in Dungeons & Dragons they're obviously the baseline assumption. Kind of the touchstone for everyone, and for a lot of players it seems like human is their go-to... The race when they're making characters, they seem to be very popular. There was that article on 538 about what character, how rare is your character class?
Yeah.
And I was surprised to see humans at the top. I would have thought it'd be something else. It seems like
elves or
tieflings or dwarves or dragonborn or something more. Some of the more exotic kind of races, and I think that's a testament to the fact that there are role players who just do this once a week and they play the game and they don't really think about it afterwards. They may or may not buy a book, they may or may not buy their own dice bags, but they're having fun in that moment. And then there are those gamers who read online. They're on Twitter, they're on Reddit, they're on the forums, they're on YouTube, right? And those people have a dedication and a desire to get more out of the game than just the casual player.
And to step outside their normal bounds of comfortability.
Right, and so I think that skews the conversations around role-playing games because it's those people who are the most dedicated who tend to be having that conversation and thinking like, well, this is kind of how I see the end of 3rd edition going down, which was like a very vocal group of passionate people were like, here are the flaws in 3rd edition, we've got to fix them, this is unacceptable, etc., and then they listened to those few people and created 4th edition for them, and then it didn't maybe go over so well. And so I kind of see that maybe with the races they're playing. In my mind, it's like, man, nobody's playing humans. Humans are the boring one. Everybody wants something new and fresh and different, and they want this thing and whatever the new race is that's coming out, where clearly that's maybe not the case. Right,
yeah.
And humans are both the baseline and perhaps one of the most popular races for people to play characters, and so it's worthwhile talking about, even though it's like people might see the title of the video and say like,
humans.
What are you going to talk about for humans? Well, guess what? Where's my camera? We're going to show you.
Yeah. So I want to start with the first and usually the ending question, why aren't you playing a variant human?
Well, number one, because you might not be allowed. It might be off limits because there are no feats allowed in a game, and so therefore variant humans off limits. And second off, even if you're playing in a game with feats, you might have a particular type of character that's very stat heavy.
Yes.
And you might want that +1 to everything. There are
Every single one.
Right, like there's some Gish builds where you want your attack stat, your con, and your casting stat. And having 3 stats that you want as high as possible.
Yeah, that's mad AF.
Every little bit helps. And so having a +1 to everything is going to be a benefit for that. That's kind of why. If you have a stat-heavy build, then you might want to go with the baseline human as opposed to the variant.
True. Or, and I have done this before with one of my humans, when I rolled up my stats, I rolled up 6 odd-numbered stats. And they were all pretty decent. Like the lowest was an 11. Right? And I'm sitting there looking, and I was like, why don't I want an 18 and 2 16s and a 14 and 2 12s?
You start looking at that.
Yeah, you start looking at it, it's like, I could bump all these up to another modifier.
Right.
Now, what is more important, bumping all 6 of your base abilities up by 1, or that 1 feat?
In that case, you're just delaying when you're taking that feat. You could get it at first level, but by raising all your ability scores by 1, you're ensuring that you don't need as many of those ability score increases later on. And so I kind of see him, in that respect, balancing them out for certain classes. Now, there are some feat-hungry builds where you want that extra feat.
Yeah, you need it.
Some fighter builds have that, where it's like, you're going to want Great Weapon Master and Polearm and Sentinel, and that kind of build, you want as many feats as quickly as possible. and you might be willing to sacrifice your raw stats in order to get the special abilities that you want to come together and a thing. So there, I don't think that at times if you're reading online, variant human seems to be baseline default human.
Yeah, it really. That's why I phrased the question like that, slightly sarcastically.
Right.
It's like, why aren't you already doing this?
Why aren't you already doing it? And so I think it's worthwhile. It's one of those things, and not just with humans, but in Dungeons and Dragons and role playing in general. Whenever I start thinking that one option is something I will never choose, and I will always choose the other one, that triggers in my mind a reaction where I go, wait a second, what's going on? Why am I not considering that other one an option? Yeah. And is there a case in which I would consider it an option? Yeah. And trying to think of ways in which, I previously ruled this one out. I felt that same way about sorcerers very recently. Right. Where I was like, I would never play a sorcerer. Why in the world would I play a sorcerer? I'm a wizard guy. And then it made me go, wait a second, where are the conditions under which I would play a sorcerer? Yeah. And really kind of discovered, there's a lot of...
Well, and to piggyback on that, I was gonna make a point about the variant human. Maybe that feat is you want to play a focus spellcaster and you want to deal one type of elemental damage.
Right.
You're gonna want to get that elemental mastery or affinity or whatever it is. You want to get that where you can bypass people's resistance with your one. Like you want to be the fire bender. You want to be the flame blaster. Whatever that. However you refer to it. Yeah. But first level. Okay, I don't care about your resistance, guys. Yeah. I'm going to burn through it.
Like I said, to me it comes down to, do you have a feat-hungry build, or do you have one that we're going to rely a lot on stats? Now, obviously, there are some drawbacks to choosing human. No dark vision is kind of the big one.
Yeah, that's the big one.
And so there might be some classes that human doesn't work as well as for. I'm thinking like rogues or rangers, those who want to sneak around a lot in dark environments. Having dark vision makes it that much easier to sneak. Kind of hard to sneak around if you're carrying a light source in a dark underground environment.
But that's why you might want to grab Skulker.
You might want to grab Skulker, or you might want to consider a 2-level dip into Warlock if it's that important to you, or you might want to just, ask a party member to pick up the Dark Vision spell and cast on you. We need it.
Help a human out.
Right, there are ways around it. It's not that big of a limitation.
But that aside, there's plenty of people in the real world that sneak around in the dark.
That's my thing with Dark Vision and Dungeons and Dragons. Period. Is like, it's not like nighttime combat is unheard of in pre-modern history. It's difficult. It's a risky endeavor, and there is a reason that night battles were rare. But at the same time, in the kind of, not like the big set piece, 50,000 men on one side and 50,000 on the other get together and clash over a period of 8 hours, but in the small scale conflicts that happen in a lot of pre-modern wars, the skirmishes, 2 scouting parties coming across one another and fighting, like that kind of thing, trying to sneak into a castle, trying to sneak into a fortified town. Those are the kinds of things which do take place under cover of darkness, and obviously not having dark vision hasn't been that much of a hindrance towards people getting around and doing things at night. It is difficult, but not impossible. And so reading the entry in the player's handbook, it's like, okay, they're sort of this kind of, there's a variety of humans. They're described as sort of colonizers and conquerors and migrants. And Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition has done a really interesting thing, and I think a really positive thing, in which it said, yes, that humans come in a wide variety of colors, shapes, sizes, and textures, and there's art to back that up. And that's different from previous editions of the game, where it's very much, it's just a bunch of, honestly, a bunch of white people who are there, and that's exclusionary to the fan base, which is, very different.
In past editions, it kind of always has felt that most human cultures are just kind of like Western European.
Western European, right. Yeah. And so there's this rich history and tradition from other regions of the world that we can draw on for our Dungeons & Dragons games. You want to be respectful, you want to be conscientious of what you're doing, but it's there as something that you can use as inspiration. And so I like the fact that the human entry in the player's handbook calls that out and says, hey, we're making an effort to be inclusive and diverse because we recognize that our fan base is inclusive and diverse, and trying to make the rules match what people are playing.
Generally, in the games that I have played in, and you can speak to your experience, humans do have kind of a dominant culture in any setting I've normally played in, right? Yeah. They are kind of one of the powerhouses.
Yes.
What are some different ways to look at that?
Part of the reason is it's an inheritance from the literature that Dungeons and Dragons draws on for its inspiration. And it's the human-centric literature, whether it's the sort of sword and sorcery literature of the 20s and 30s, or Middle Earth and its derivatives moving from the 70s onwards. Like, humans seem to be the central focus of most of this literature, and therefore Dungeons and Dragons then becomes humans are the central race, the central touchstone for everyone in the original editions of the game. Yeah. They're the ones that can be the most classes. They have no level limits on them. Right. And other classes are literally demi-humans. They are less than human.
Yeah.
They have level caps. And it's like, even like elves, the majestic, magic suffused, they have a cap on how, like, humans will be better wizards than an elf.
How does that happen?
It just does. That's the way because the elf gets a bunch of bonuses at first level that the humans don't get, and so
the elf is eventually at some point going to go, I'm tired of this.
I'm tired of this, or do something else. I think that there was a purpose and a place for those kind of level limits in old school Dungeons and Dragons. In newer versions of the game, I think those level limits are rightly gotten rid of, and we can now just play whatever we want. But coming back to what you're talking about, the dominant human, I think that's the legacy of it. The fact that there are so many human kingdoms and human monarchies and empires and republics and what have you. That's where you're seeing that legacy, and they're trying to then justify it by saying, well, they're migrants. They're moving all over the place. They inhabit every corner of these worlds. They're conquerors and colonizers. They seep into the world and create these lasting institutions, whereas an elf or a dwarf might live for hundreds of years and personally be invested in a place. A human founds an organization or a temple or something, a government type, and it endures for generations.
Because of their short-lived lives.
Because of their short-lived lives and the fact that there's so many of them, they're able to imbue these institutions with longevity in that respect. And that's why you don't have a situation where elves control everything or dwarves control everything, something like that. I think that's an interesting take on it. It certainly has implications if you think about it. Like, why are the other races not resentful of humanity for their omnipresence?
Well, some of them are, though. I mean, it's certainly played that way.
I think that you can play it that way. I think the Witcher setting does a really good job of showing what happens with a human-centric world where they use that and the power that would come from humanity controlling everything, and the fact that they put dwarves and halflings and elves into ghettos and institute pogroms against them because of that. It's a dark world, the Witcher world is, but it's also one of those that I think takes seriously the power dynamics between the different races. And so I think that, like, looking at that baseline humanity as presented in the player's handbook of adaptability, creating these long-lasting institutions of a diverse race that's found in every corner of the globe, that's kind of an easy thing to think of, right? That's an easy touchstone for new players of the game or for people who just they don't want to have to. Playing a Dragonborn or a Tiefling is just too alien for them.
This is a game, it's supposed to be some fantastical reflection of our own world and history, so it's easy for us to think about human empires spanning continents, and because hey, that happened, right? Humans moving into areas and taking others' land. Oh, because that happened, right? Right. Our ancestors were murder hobos, is what I'm saying.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's absolutely true. There's a lot of murder hoboism in our own history, and I think that what we can draw from our own history is we can inform our Dungeons and Dragons settings with that history, and you don't have to have taken a bunch of courses in it. You don't have to take a bunch of books. You can just pull up a Wikipedia article and go with that with the understanding that what's one person's ancient history is another person's very personal identity. And so you just got to be careful with those kinds of things. Looking at humanity in your Dungeons and Dragons setting and going like, how can I make changes to the baseline assumption to create something unique and different? So like for my own homebrew setting, humanity shares power with the other two dominant races of the world, the dwarves and goblin kind, and sort of a triumvirate of power in which the different representatives of those peoples have divided up the responsibility of keeping this continent-wide empire going. Whether it's the military might of the goblinoids, the administrative capacity and trade links that the dwarves have, or just the personal charisma and ruling ability of the humans, that's kind of this trifecta of power that controls this continent-wide empire. But other places you might say like, well, maybe humanity isn't the dominant force.
Yeah.
Right? Like maybe humanity is, they're the scrappy newcomers on the scene, you know, newly created by the gods who are new themselves, right? Like the human gods are as new as humanity itself. And, you know, you'd want to find where they came from, how they came about. Maybe they languish in obscurity in some corner of the world that you've never really fully explored and come exploding out of it.
Yeah, they're on the island just off the coast and that all start making landfall.
Right. I mean, there's a concept in history known as these places in our own world called, they call them the womb of nations.
Yes.
Central Asia is one of those, Scandinavia is one of those, and in our own history, they tend to just like erupt in pressure, whether it's the Huns and Mongols and other steppe peoples or Germanic barbarian tribes who migrate out of Scandinavia and you know, seem to have done well for themselves over the centuries, that you can draw that into your own Dungeons and Dragons world and say, yeah, there's this place on the map where there's just a bunch of barbarians that live. They just tents made of animal skins and they eat weird stuff, and maybe it's the sophisticated, highly refined cultural supremacy of the elves and dwarves who looks at these just gross, like, God, and they breed like rabbits. And they're just like, and you know, you can draw these
gone
like,
in a blink of an eye.
Gone in the blink of an eye. You can hardly learn their name before one of them dies. And that those sort of like explode out of the particular region in your Dungeons and Dragons world, and you deal with the implications that are present in the player's handbook of the humans being conquerors and migrants and colonizers, and deal with that in game. And like, yeah, we've got a real human problem on our hands in this elven kingdom. They came out of nowhere, and there are thousands of them. Yeah, they're getting a little upset, and things could get something could set this fuse off, and now you've got a real problem.
They're coming into your forest, chopping all your trees down because they want to make homes.
Right, hunting all the game.
Like, why don't they just grow the trees into their home? Well, they only live for 50 years.
They only live for 50 years, and a tree doesn't. Yeah. So I think that there's potential there, sort of like the scrappy newcomer creating conflict and tension with more established races. There's using humanity as kind of the oppressed masses of humanity, or even going full on like humans are enslaved. Like there's all of these races that are much more powerful than humanity, live longer. And different ways that you can take that, right?
Well, yeah, like in that same scenario, what if the elves like saw this at the beginning, we're like, you know what, we need to do something about this before it gets out of hand, swoop in with their high magic, enslave all the humans to do their bidding and keep them in check.
Right. I've done something like that in other games where it's like the elves, and for me it's one of those things where I really look at the elves and I go, I have to come up with a reason for why they don't control everything based on how long they live. Right. The accumulation of wealth and power that comes from having lived so long grant them a kind of authority and power that I don't find present in D&D worlds, and I'm not always satisfied by the let's all just get along and fight the evil races kind of thing that sometimes goes on. So I envision a world in which the elves are like, humans live in this little village, there's a cluster of villages, and everyone knows that the wandering elf helps us. That the wandering elf helped my grandfather and his grandfather before him and before him and before him as far back as anyone can ever remember, and there are written records. This one elf comes and helps us. And we send a quarter of our grain to the castle where he may or may not live. But what they don't realize is that elf has watched these villagers grow from generation to generation. And like they aren't even aware of their enslavement. They aren't even aware that the other races sort of control things. There's a variant of that where you can do like sort of the monsters have won kind of thing, where the humanity is on the verge of extinction or something. Just anything that kind of takes the assumptions of the player's handbook human and sort of tweaks it just a little bit. Maybe they're not the dominant ones. Maybe there's still a lot of them, but they haven't leveraged those numbers into real power.
Well, I love the humans on the verge of extinction, like, because at that point, like, if you have a human in the party, they might be the only human.
Right.
And maybe, like, elves and dwarves are like, we haven't seen any of y'all in a century.
Yeah.
Which, how the hell are you alive?
Right, what are you doing? Yeah, maybe the humans have disappeared or were driven to near extinction, and you're like, I'm the last human.
Once again, like I would play my character like Sean Connery.
I am the last one.
That's just beating that one to death.
I want humans in my game. They're a popular race. I'm going to have players who want to play humans. I don't think I've ever run a campaign where someone didn't play a human. Right. And
I can't.
I'd have
to actually think for a while.
Right. Thinking about the human's place in your campaign world and coming up with different ways or different takes on it is going to just add something different and present something different to people. And you don't have to go with the default there's 8 human kingdoms and they're all variations of the same. Mm-hmm. But I only got the one dwarf. Maybe you switch that around.
Yeah.
And try something different with your humanity. What's the guy that does the movie reviews? There's an alien. He pretends to be an alien.
Oh, Earthling Cinema.
Earthling Cinema.
I'm Garrick Swarmuloid. Yeah. And today on
that guy needs to get out of the house a little more often. That guy put a lot of work into that premise. That's like the most premise-heavy YouTube channel I think.
Let me tell you though, if you watch it from the beginning, it's so worth it. Because once you learn all the little things like not showing food, not showing eating, because that's like porno. And everything's a horse if it has 4 legs. Start learning the verbiage of that, of how they interpret humanity.
Yeah,
because that's the thing.
They've done a really clever thing.
There's continuity there that they stick to.
Yeah.
And so that's what I love about it. It is fucking funny, and the fact that it's always Chris Nolan's brother. Yeah. Anytime it's anything to do with Christopher Nolan, it's his brother that they refer to. Just because you would get those facts wrong.
Humans.
Hello, fellow human. I'm Human Pruitt, and this is Human Jim. And today on WebDM, human music.